stressed need for ongoing monitoring as our planet's last great tropical forests are threatened as never before. For the moment, at least, humanity should still consider tropical forests as carbon sponges, but if urgent and bold measures aren't taken soon, they could well change. So that's a little bit of an update there from Common Dreams and Andrew Germanos, a staff writer, off of that study there that we talked about. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Like that is some of the most... If we see that happening, that's when you know, like, we are in serious trouble, and that is when things really start to get quite serious. It's some of the most, I think it's really some of the most crazy things that we see. It's like if that continues to happen, like what I just don't know what we're gonna do, because even if, like, for example, Bernie Sanders type person, and this again another thing that makes his election so important, like he's the only one that understands the gravity of the problem. This is stuff that we have to live with, especially if you're a young kid, like 25 to like 15, really. Like, this is going to be happening all when you're in the position to, like, suffer through it the most. Like, this, like, I'm starting to sound like Greta Thunberg here, but she's got a pretty good damn point. It's like, we are being screwed by the older generations who have let this happen and done nothing about it. Now, obviously, it isn't everyone, but it's the powerful people in charge that have absolutely steered us into steered the Titanic into an iceberg here for the sake of their own profits. I think that's something that is indisputable and incredibly sad, if you think about it. So, yeah. Here's something also pretty sad. After Super Tuesday's results made clear, the 2020 Democratic primary is now a two-candidate race between Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Progressives called for an end to divisive infighting, and some urged Elizabeth Warren to join Sanders in a united front against the party's deep-pocketed and organized established wing. I'm a Bernie supporter who builds with Warren supporters, tweeted Varshani Prakash, executive director of youth-led Sunrise Movement, which endorsed Sanders in January. This isn't the time for infighting and vitriol. Let's leverage our shared power to break through the wall of corporate media, win this primary, and defeat Trump. Let's #build together. So, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, these are supposedly candidates that are aligned on everything, people who care deeply about the progressive message. But I think at this point, I really don't know what's going to happen, because there's no way of saying for sure. Like, if you're, for example, the Working Families Party who's coming out and saying, oh, the Elizabeth Warren, we endorsed her with the expectation she'd be a real progressive. We know she's going to be a real progressive. She'll come in, she'll support Bernie. Like, that's the right thing. She's going to. The Working Families Party said that pretty much yesterday. And Elizabeth Warren comes and releases a statement. She's still, as of the recording of this episode, around 8:30 on Thursday, she has still refused, flat out refused to do anything about this. So, yeah, it was a call of progressive unity that others echoed before, both before and after Super Tuesday, which saw Biden win 10 out of 14 states, including the delegate-rich Texas, and take a narrow lead in pledged delegates. Sanders won 4 states, including California, the largest delegate prize of the night, and he won it pretty well. So well enough that he and Biden will be the only one getting delegates out of it. With the Build Together hashtag making the rounds among both Sanders and Warren supporters, journalist Sam Adler-Bell said, the posts are obviously quite an effort to build goodwill between two support bases that must obviously combine to defeat the corporate billionaire wing of the party. I have no patience for anyone upset about it. I think that's absolutely right. So, Roger Lau, who many on the outside looking at him, and Joe Rossbars, who are former Obama officials, many of them really seem to assume that, many people really, I think, from what I've been hearing, assume that this is, like, they're behind Elizabeth Warren's big progressive push, anti-progressive push, or her drifting away from the progressives on this situation, and pretty much saying that a lot of people are turning away from this. But this is, I think, a great analysis here from Crystal Ball, who's been very, very tough and critical of Elizabeth Warren on her show Rising, and she's pretty much saying what needs to be done, and she probably does not want to do this for Elizabeth Warren. She does not want to see this happen for Elizabeth Warren, but I think this is exactly the way it needs to go.
In the final days before Super Tuesday. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, number one is to understand what actually happened. Don't listen to the media narratives that say that there's this massive, organic, anti-Bernie Sanders movement. No, that's not it. For example, let's take a look at what the exit polls had to say about Medicare for All. Voters overwhelmingly find Medicare for All to be an appealing position. It's popular in every state that we have seen so far. When voters are asked what candidates they trust most on the issues, they still routinely say Bernie Sanders on health care and on climate change. So the problem isn't the economic positioning. The problem isn't the core messaging around those issues. And the problem isn't that people hate Bernie Sanders. There's not this organic nobody likes him movement out there in the country. The problem for him was all about electability. Many of these voters just want to beat Donald Trump. And so when the signal went out that Joe Biden was the guy to beat Donald Trump, they all lined up behind him.
I think that is really illustrative of what happened because, I mean, whether the establishment liked it or not, for a long time in between New Hampshire and the moment those South Carolina results came in, a lot of people were being forced to admit it. People who did not want to admit it were being forced to admit it that Bernie Sanders was the one who had the power to beat Donald Trump and was going to lead and should lead the Democratic Party. The voters were behind him, and that's why I think really you saw in Nevada, Bernie Sanders even started to make inroads with moderates. Like those poll numbers, people who did not like Bernie Sanders were supporting him. People who didn't have Bernie Sanders as their first choice coming in. He was deeply expanding his base of support into areas that he did not, or areas of people, groups of people that had no interest in supporting him. And the moment those South Carolina results came in, all that was gone. The media narrative and the major coalescing of all these other people's favorite candidates behind them, behind Joe Biden, was absolutely huge in shifting the narrative and saying, okay, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. Here's how we get behind, and here's how we rally the base here, and here's how we tell people that Bernie is not the best option. Bernie, you don't have to support your Bernie. Hold your nose and support Bernie if you didn't previously like him. Like, Joe Biden's going to win. He's the most electable candidate. Why aren't you supporting it? And I think that really, like that, the fact that Joe Biden, he came off looking like the winner, even though it was a state that he definitely should have won, one that he had a much bigger lead in as a previous. But I think that helped him a lot with the black support, and it helped him a lot with moderates who are coming out and saying that, yeah, I'm gonna support Joe Biden because he's gonna be the one that's gonna bring us across the finish line. That is it. So, yeah, that is, I think, a very telling picture of what happened, and it's really going to be interesting to see what Bernie's going to do to come back. But here's this proposal from, again, Crystal Ball and Rising, which I listened last night and I was like, yeah, that's actually really pretty interesting and genius.
What the Sanders people have to understand is that if they are going to win those folks back, they are going to need to shift that narrative so that people can see Joe Biden's flaws, how easily Trump will defeat him, and how Bernie Sanders is the candidate that truly can defeat Donald Trump in the fall. And if he doesn't do that, he's not going to be able to succeed here. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, some of that work has started already. Unconscionably, leading up to South Carolina and leading up to Super Tuesday, the Sanders campaign really didn't make much of an argument against Joe Biden. There were no negative ads on the airwaves. There wasn't much messaging coming out of the campaign. They took their eye off the ball and were focused more on Michael Bloomberg until this rude awakening in the final days. So now, what case do they need to make against Joe Biden? It's a case on policy, but it's fundamentally about electability. You have to go back to talking about trade, how Joe Biden supported every bad trade deal that has decimated our heartland. Have to talk about Social Security, one of the top issues, especially for older voters, a demographic which Joe Biden performs incredibly well.
Yeah, and also, all right, starting with trade there, I think that's so important because trade, what you really need to do is hit trade, especially in the industrial Midwest, and pretty much all the industrial Midwest primaries are coming up within, I don't know, like the next 3 weeks. So, what I think if I were Bernie Sanders campaign manager, and I'm not saying I'm very like good or smart at this, but what I would do and what I think he should do, and this is probably a pretty obvious thing to say, is really hammer home, just play videos of Joe Biden over and over again on TV, saying that he supports NAFTA, he supports TPP, and believe me, there are a lot of videos out there, very, very recent videos, as a matter of fact, that will give a very good and clear perception of Joe Biden saying that, yep, I support NAFTA and TPP. Like that, I do support NAFTA and TPP. They were good, they were ambitious, and they were right. Especially TPP because he did it with Obama, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, like TPP, I believe, was signed with Obama, and unless I'm really screwing that up, but that is huge because TPP was also incredibly devastating to the industrial Midwest, and Bernie Sanders, who's had a long record of supporting this. Supporting workers and being anti-trade deal, if he comes out and he really makes that clear, I think that's huge and really turns the tide of the industrial Midwest and paints Joe Biden as a weak candidate, Hillary 2.0, who's going to come in and lose in November. I think you probably draw Biden and Hillary comparisons. That would make Hillary really pissed off, so I'm here for it. And B, you also make sure that Democratic voters understand that Hillary and Joe Biden are really similar because they are. If maybe possibly Joe Biden will be a little bit worse.
Go back to talking about war and the commitment to these bad war votes, especially on Iraq. These are all things that the Sanders camp made against Joe Biden leading into Iowa that they did not make before. Some of that work has started already. We heard that critique coming from Bernie Sanders last night as he spoke about the results.
And then, of course, a Bernie Sanders ad comes up. But yeah, so that is...
Hi.
There's a lot of like very interesting and important stuff like that he says there, and I think this is something that he's going to really have to.
Going to beat Trump because this will become a contrast in ideas. One of us in this race led the opposition to the war in Iraq. You're looking at him. Another candidate voted for the war in Iraq. One of us has spent his entire life fighting against cuts in Social Security, wanting to expand Social Security. Another candidate has been on the floor of the Senate calling for cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Program. One of us led the opposition to disastrous trade agreements which cost us millions of good-paying jobs. And that's me. And another candidate voted for disastrous trade agreements. One of us stood up for consumers and said we will not support a disastrous bankruptcy bill. And another candidate represented the credit card companies and voted for that disastrous bill.
I think it's really clear. He can do this. He can get the job done. Like, this is so important to realize. Bernie Sanders, he's got the policies, he's got the contracts to draw. All he has to do them and draw them a very fast, quick, and effective way. And by the way, also Elizabeth Warren really needs to drop out. that is definitely a very, very big deal. So Roger Lau, Warren's campaign manager, sent an email to staffers Wednesday morning announcing Warren is meeting with her team to assess the path forward after she failed to place higher than third in any of the Super Tuesday states, including her home state of Massachusetts. So this decision is in her hands. It is important that she has time and space to consider what comes next. Sanders' campaign manager, Faz Shakir, echoed the sentiment in an interview with CNN ahead of Super Tuesday. She's been campaigning very hard, has raised a lot of money